We'd like to now welcome online. Our guests have arrived. This is Nayaswami Jyotish and Nayaswami Devi, spiritual directors of Ananda Worldwide, and they have come online all the way from Ananda Village. So feel free, if you would like to, stay muted for right now as they talk with us. But if you'd like to open your cameras, let them see your smiling Texas. Well, not everyone online is from Texas, but your smiling faces. So Jyotish and Devi, we turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you all, in a certain way, and we'll talk about this a little bit today. The pandemic, the virus, has provided us with opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise. We would not normally be able to travel at this time of year to come and visit you. And yet here we are all gathering together from all corners of the earth and all parts of Texas. And the trip is much shorter physically, but still we get most of the benefit through a link like this.
And I'll just add, we welcome you to our living room here at Ananda Village. And behind us, you see a beautiful painting of Jyotish's called a Pole Star, based on the beautiful chant, "I've made thee pole star of my life." And that's very important to remember during these times. So we'd like to share with you on the topic of discussion today. Jyotish will start. Our topic is perfection is in self-transcendence.
It's very interesting, the trip that we make from, let's call it, delusion to self-realization. There are layers and layers and layers to what we have to overcome or actually release. As Ramakrishna pointed out, that the spiritual path to a certain extent is like an onion. You take off the top layer and there's a layer underneath. You take that off, you take that off, continue taking that off until eventually you get to the very center of the onion. You take that off, there's nothing left of the onion. And so if you think of delusion as being like those layers of the onion, we have to remove layer by layer by layer those things that keep us from knowing essentially who we really are and our connection with God, or our extension as a part of God. And we have no real reality other than that. Any thought, any self-image that we have that is other than that we're simply an extension of God is just one of those layers of the onion. Well, an onion has a few layers. We have thousands of layers that we have to work through. But that sense of self-transcendence is not that we're trying to add something, we're simply trying to remove the false identities that we have. And Swami Kriyananda described the ego as a very interesting way, in a very interesting way. He said that the ego, which is the soul, the unified soul aspect of God that knows itself, is identified with this body and this personality. The personality Swami called a bundle of self-definitions. Think of it like a quiver of arrows, and you have all these self-definitions. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a Texan, I'm a Californian, I'm an American, I'm an Indian, on and on and on. I'm smart, I'm not smart. We have positive and negative self-definitions. So what comes to us through life are the karmic results of having self-definitions or living in some degree of ignorance, or having those layers. And so the way the universe teaches us is through karma. And so karma comes to us in order, a test of karma comes to us in order to help us release whatever layer it is that is out of tune with the universe and out of tune with God, out of tune with the consciousness of God, whatever that self-definition is, whatever that layer is, whatever those fears and anxieties and reactions are, tests of karma come in order to help us release. And so that sense of self-transcendence is we have to transcend those limited definitions of ourselves. We have to transcend the ego ultimately. And so the tests that come to us karmically are to help us learn that. Now, in life, generally speaking, we have, I don't know, 2 or 3 things that we might really be working on in any given incarnation. We have, anyway, just a few. I don't need to put a number on them. We'll have little ones, but there may be 1 or 2 or 3 big ones. And those keep reappearing as variations on a theme that come to us, and they're uncomfortable for us. So they force us to work on ourselves, to transcend whatever the limitation is in our consciousness that has drawn that test. Right now, the world is going through a karmic test with this virus and the pandemic and the economic results of it, all of the aspects of that. So a karmic test, we have individual karma, we have mass karma. A karmic test has come to the world, and its purpose is to help us as a human consciousness to evolve, to transcend the limitations that we have had that we're working under. Now, either as an individual or as a whole nation or a whole global consciousness of humanity, even though the tests come, even though they can be extremely uncomfortable, we may learn our lesson and we may not. Mester talked about the consciousness as being made up of mental citizens. So we have thousands of mental citizens. And so in this country, we have thousands of mental citizens, and some of those will learn the lessons from this pandemic, which is to reach out to others, to support others, to be more kind and more caring toward others. You know, there'll be probably severe economic ramifications from this. Yogananda said that the root cause of depression, because he lived during the big depression of the 1930s, he said the root cause of depression is greed. That means taking more to yourself than what you need. And if we look at the pattern in everything in modern life, there is a rush toward having more than we need. You look at it in any kind of things. You look at the salaries of top executives where they earn 600, 1,000 times more than what their employees earn. You look at it in the contracts of athletes where they're pushing to make hundreds of millions of dollars. And all of those things are admirable to the American consciousness, but also to the world consciousness. So right now, the world consciousness, and certainly the American consciousness, admires greed. That's different from admiring success. Of course, we should try to be successful. Of course, one of the, ramifications or the outflow of being successful is that money flows to you. If money flows to you, that's a good thing. It's not bad. But if you take that money and want more and more and more, then there's something lacking inside of yourself that is hungry and can't be fed no matter how much money you have. If instead you can transcend that layer that delusion that you have. And yes, attract money. Yes, be successful. But take that. Don't hold on to more than you need, and use whatever comes to you to help the other people that don't have as much. And if the world consciousness with this pandemic and the economic influences of it, if the world consciousness could learn that lesson, don't take more to yourself than what you really need. If you have more, then use that more to help other people. It's such a simple equation, such a simple concept, and yet so far from the desire pattern of most people. So if this pandemic is coming to help us learn that, then we can't naturally expect everyone to learn that. But we ourselves individually can use this time as a means for self-transcendence, so that whatever is coming to us right now, be it health-wise or the ramifications of that health challenge, maybe you know people who have been sick, maybe you know people who have died. We have just a very few in the world of Ananda who have passed away, just one person who's passed away.
In Italy.
In Italy, this man who has been a long-time member of Ananda got the virus and passed away. And we know a few others who have had it, but not been so seriously ill. But probably all of us know somebody that has been affected by this. If not, we know of the news. Anyway, without going into that very much, the lesson here is to reach out to those people who are suffering. Reach out to them and share your wealth. Now, that wealth may be financial. That wealth may be that you yourself are not affected and that you have spiritual teachings that allow you to be strong and centered and keep your consciousness high so that you can reach out to be a spiritual support to others. You may have emotional strength. Maybe you aren't affected by anxiety or fear or some sort of negative downward pulling. You know, in the reading today, it talked about that we should love our enemies. Well, in this sense, maybe we don't feel actual enemies, but the world today is, I don't know, containing itself inside of tribes, and those tribes are fighting each other. We see it in our national dysfunctional politics, that we're fighting with each other. And where is the thou shalt love thy enemies? Where is the love of others that is needed in order to transcend this state of consciousness? So I'll just end by saying that when a test like this comes to us, realize that we ourselves, either as mass consciousness or individual consciousness, have drawn that test to us in order to learn and in order to transcend whatever delusion is keeping us contained. So this, I recently wrote a blog and said that, like the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities, this is the best of times and the worst of times, depending on how we take it in. This can be a terrible disaster, or it can be a great spiritual blessing, both for us individually and for the nation and the world as a whole.
Thank you, Jyotish. And I'll share a few words briefly now as well. First, just to say once more, we're very, very glad we can be with you today, this Sunday morning, for your Sunday satsang and service. And it's just wonderful to be connected in this way. It's maybe one of God's gifts to us at this time is technology, so we can use it to stay connected. It's not the enemy. So there's 2 points I'd like to touch on. First, the title of our reading this week, Perfection Lies in Self-Transcendence. What is perfection and what is self-transcendence in this context? Well, Christ speaks in the passage that we read of not returning love with hatred. Love those who love you not, and see your enemies as love them. And don't even the tax collectors, they have the ability to love those who love them, but we must be more than that. And so this is how he's leading us towards perfection, to look at the normal emotional human reactions and to control those, to rise above them, to transcend them and say, yes, it's easy for me to love this nice person or this sweet child, but what about that colleague at work that's always trying to undermine me, or that mother-in-law that's always criticizing me? Whatever it is, we all have those people in our lives that are challenging. But if we can control the reaction and just say, I'm not going to get caught here. It's not, ultimately you get to the point where you realize it's simply not worth your time to be trapped in negative emotions. It's a waste of time. And I would rather, even if it's simply an affirmation, even if I really can't love that difficult person at work, I will try to be harmonious. I will try to respond to them in a positive way. And so we begin to transcend our normal human reactions. And then Christ concludes that passage by saying, be therefore perfect, even as thy Father who art in heaven is perfect. Well, how do we be perfect like God is perfect? I mean, it's a little, in a way, it's a little mind-boggling. But then if you think of perfection in terms of self-transcendence, the more in meditation, in right living, in controlling negative reactions, the more we get ourselves out of the way, the more we feel like the only reality, our true reality, is not the bundle of self-definitions or our personality, or you fill in the blanks, all the ways we define ourselves. But our true reality is God's presence within us. And we get there by being able to control the reactive process, control those petty little likes and dislikes of the ego. I like this, I don't like this. You know, there was a story that Swami Ananda tells in his autobiography, The New Path, where there was I think it was a wedding, it was some social gathering, and Master was giving, Yoganandaji was giving roses to many of the disciples who were there just to put on their shirt or whatever. And he gave one woman a red rose, and she said, oh, I wanted a pink rose. And Master looked at her very sternly and said, what I give, you take. And, you know, expanding that now to where we are socially, medically, financially, all of the things that are being challenged in the whole world, what God gives, we take. And if we can put it in the context of self-transcendence, not to say, oh, I want this, I don't want that. I know a number of people who have severe health challenges. A young couple I know, they're mid-40s, very dynamic, bright young people. He was a big success in the tech world and retired early. And they were looking forward to a retirement, you know, of enjoying themselves. And not too long after retirement, he was diagnosed with MS, and his whole life has changed. But we talk to them often. They don't live here at Ananda Village, but he's facing it with such positive energy. It's inspirational to talk with them, just doing what he can and starting these projects, and always with a big smile on his face. God gave him that. He didn't ask for that. And so thy enemy, who are our enemies? Our enemies aren't just people or nations or other religions. Our enemies are those things that we reject and say, no, I don't want that, anything but that, because that draws negative energy out of us. But if everything that comes, we can embrace as a friend, as Christ was saying in that passage, if we can say, you may come looking like a horrible, virulent virus, but you are my friend. You may come looking like financial collapse, but you are my friend. And the more we can accept what God gives in a positive spirit, the more we see the world from a higher perspective. And ultimately, we see the world with God looking through our own eyes. And then it's all perfect. Because Swamiji said, I love and with sincerity, when I say Swamiji, our lifelong teacher, Swami Kriyananda, he said, I love everyone I meet because I see God in them. And I love the God that's in them. And so how do you get to that point? Not from the ego, not from likes and dislikes. I like her nice sense of humor. I like his very brilliant mind. No, it's by seeing the God in other people. And when we see the God in other people, we're able to do that if we feel God within ourselves. And so to look at the world around us now and not see it as inimical, not see it as our enemy, but to see this as a gift. I'm sure you're getting many, many articles as we are from friends. Oh, read this and read that and look at this video and all that. But someone sent me a very short thing yesterday that said in the Chinese language, the character for crisis, and opportunity is the same character. Very interesting, isn't it? Crisis and opportunity are the same character. And so the enemy really is, if we want to find perfection, the enemy is anything that diminishes our awareness of God in ourselves, in other people, in the world around us. And I want to just read a very brief passage from Master, Ananda.org, the website from Ananda Sangha, has a little email app that you can get. Well, I'm not sure if it's an app or what is it.
I think it's just an email.
You can sign up for. It's called A Day in the Life of Paramahansa Yogananda. If you don't get it, it's free. You just click on it and they email it to you every day. It's wonderful. And they tell you what Master was doing on that day in different years of his life. And so today on May 3rd, I can't believe it's May already. April was the last month, but on May 3rd, Master gave a talk, and it was called the flower. Let me get the right title so I don't mess this up. The Garden of Flowering Qualities. And so it said he gave that talk today, May 3rd, 1942. So that's almost 80 years ago.
And in the midst of a war.
And so I thought, let me see what that, and it said it was transcribed and printed in the Divine Romance. So I just read it. And I just want to read one sentence to you. Two sentences. By being negative and affirming to yourself negative thoughts, you see this world as a forest of fear. By seeking goodness, being good, and affirming good, you see this world as a garden of beauty. So we have the choice. Let's try to see goodness all around us, and then we'll be able to see this world just as it is. Even if it gets worse, if it gets better, doesn't matter. If we live with positive qualities, we see this world as a garden of beauty. So God bless you all. May God give you strength. May He give you uplifted consciousness so that everything that comes in your life may be seen as coming directly from God's hands as His blessing.